Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing remarkably well, and I hope you've had a lovely day and are about to settle down and get yourself a lovely drink, because we've got a lovely story tonight that involves a really nasty mother-in-law, and I always love those kind of stories. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story, shall we? Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I wasn't enjoying our road trip one little bit, but then again, I'd never exactly been a patient traveller at the best of times. This was the last part of our 49-hour journey, from New York City to the Oregon coast, but the final stint seemed to have gone on forever, almost as if time had stood still. It had taken us 4 days of travel on the road, where we'd stopped at various hotels along the way for a much-needed overnight stay. It didn't help, of course, that it was unbearably hot and insufferably stuffy cooped up in the car in the middle of the summer. With my husband, we were like 2 meat pies in an overheated larder that were gradually starting to turn as we were sweating so profusely. Come to think of it, my husband's car did smell a bit funky, as our perspiration lingered in the air, rather reminding me of the stale, cheesy smell you get from dirty sneakers. My clothes on the back of my legs were sticking to me, which wasn't remotely pleasant. Gully had refused to put the air conditioning unit on in our SUV. He believed it brought on colds and flu for him, and made him rather sick, even though it was the middle of summer, for goodness sake. I'd never heard anything so ridiculous in all my life, but challenging my obstinate husband on this was more than my life was worth, and frankly I didn't have the energy to put up such a fuss. I knew that you could choose your battles in life, and this was one of those that I was not prepared to fight, nor was I willing to do so, as on a long road trip, quite frankly, it's too exhausting to argue, and it makes the atmosphere on a long sticky journey so much more unpleasant. I had prepared myself well for the sauna I was expecting to endure on this trip. I had brought a damp face cloth which I kept in a plastic bag in my purse, along with a bottle of refresher spray that occasionally I would spray over my face to cool me down, but the relief I received was temporary and short-lived. How I wished that I could dive in an ice-cold swimming pool right now to revive myself from the sludgy, grimy, insufferable feeling of being grubby and unkept, like someone who lived in Tent City and hadn't bathed for months on end. I looked so dishevelled, I couldn't even bear to look at myself in the visor mirror, because I was afraid of what I would see, but I was very conscious that my hair was very greasy and hanging around my face unapologetically. Dark rings had appeared under my eye area that looked as if I hadn't been sleeping. They had become puffy. I did look like someone who had been thrown a couple of punches, and anyone looking at my sorry state, well, those of my creased clothes, that is, would assume at once I'd been sleeping in them for days, which wasn't true, of course. I was wearing cool linen pants, and that was a very bad choice to make, for the material had crinkled up badly. I did want to look moderately respectable when we finally reached our destination, but I could see now that that was a wish that would not be fulfilled. My husband Gully had insisted on playing Leonard Cohen and Carly Simon on the trip all the way to the coast. I think he'd always fancied himself as a bit of a poet, so he was drawn to deep, meaningful lyrics that sometimes can be all too much when you don't want to think too deeply about anything at all. The sun glared at us obtrusively through the car windscreen window, as if its soulful intention was purposely to blind us. Regretfully, I'd foolishly left my dark glasses in my suitcase, which was in the back of the trunk. Fat lot of good they were for me right now. I couldn't help thinking, based on the grubby way I was feeling, that this was a day that was not going to end well. The silent signs were everywhere for me, pointing to a drama that would soon unfold in our reality. And it turned out that I would be right on this one. Indeed, this would be a day that I would never be likely to forget. It was a long time since I'd been on a long-suffering road trip such as this, and I had forgotten what an abysmal and very poor traveller I was. for travelling over long distances was in no way fun. I know some people do it as a way of life for themselves, but personally, I couldn't imagine anything worse. The bottle of water I was drinking was now lukewarm. During the journey I'd been unable to focus on my cell phone for entertainment, as the jolting, rocking motions of my husband's SUV had made me feel somewhat queasy. And my head had begun to thump, which was a warning sign, of course, that a migraine headache was well on its way, eager to offer me another punishing blow on this trip. I quickly pulled out a couple of pain relief pills from my purse, washing them down with the bottle of insipid water, hoping that my headache would be nipped in the bud before we finally reached my in-laws' gorgeous seafront home, and I'm glad to say the pills did the trick. I hate to have to admit that patience has never been one of my greatest virtues, and on this day it had worn very thin, as I began to twitch rather nervously in my seat, wishing with all my heart we could finally get to our destination, for the minutes dragged on laboriously, like a lifetime. I do remember when I was a girl at school, when I waited for that gong to sound so that the school day would finally be over. I would get out of those school gates faster than a Jack Russell in pursuit of a rabbit, let me tell you. Growing up, my mother would always be quick to point out that I was always in a rush to get to the finish line. When it came to accomplishing any task, even if I had done a half-hearted, cack-handed job just to get there, my mother would say, "For God's sake, Sandra, calm down, will you? Can't you take your time when you do things? You're always in such a tearing rush, and when you're like that, you're going to invariably overlook things, like the time when you made that chocolate cake, and you used salt instead of sugar, because you were in such a rush to get it completed. You need to take things one step at a time, dear. Do things methodically. Sometimes you can be like a bull in a china shop. You're just like your father in that regard, always needing to do things so quickly. I see it all the time when I'm driving on the road, you know. People tearing through the red lights to get to their destination a little faster. And sometimes their decision to rush and their raging impatience will cost them their lives. But it's not like that for me, I'd told my mother. I wouldn't risk my life to arrive at a destination in record time. But as I thought about this, that wasn't exactly true. If I could press down the accelerator of the car right now and race down all these roads just to get to the Finnegan home, that much quicker I'd probably have been tempted to do so, which would have been an accident waiting to happen, because some of the roads that we were embracing at the moment were pretty precarious. "That was not what I was trying to say, Sandra," my mother had said to me. "What I'm trying to say is you've got the kind of mentality that believes that everything should be done at record speed, like when you painted your bedroom yellow. I remember you came to me, insisting you wanted to paint the bedroom yellow. So I let you do it, thinking you would do a good job. But no, you rushed through everything, and did such a lousy job on that painting. So much so that I had to complete it for you. I had to repaint the entire bedroom." Suffice to say, I never did listen to my mother's advice, although I should have done so. I guess I was driven with an impulsive need to get things done at the speed of light, and try as I might to change this behaviour of mine, I simply couldn't rein it in, because my mother was right. I was exactly like my father. My mother knew I'd done a cack-handed job in painting my bedroom yellow that time, but doing things speedily, from my homework to chores, always meant I got them out of the way sooner. But more often than not, my intrinsic desire to rush all the time had never served me well. I still didn't learn from my mistakes, even as a grown-up woman. When Gully, who is my second husband, proposed to me, I was the one so excited to get married, but it had to be as soon as possible. So I persuaded him to fly to Vegas with me and to get married in one of those little chapels there, as I wanted to tie the knot as soon as we possibly could. It would seem even getting married in a tearing rush had felt like a good idea to me, especially when I considered Gully to be the man of my dreams, despite a plethora of faults that I had discovered in his personality that I would have liked to have changed. The worst, of course, being his inability to see how dreadfully hot the car was on this road trip, so that I was forced to suffer in silence, without any air conditioning. And then there was the inclination that Gully had to be ever so frugal about things from time to time. He will get upset, for example, if you accidentally leave the milk out of the refrigerator and it turns sour, because he can't bear waste and is always concerned about the numbers in his pocketbook and parting with too much cash. I can safely say my need to rush all the time has not been my most endearing quality as far as Gully is concerned, especially when I was up at the crack of dawn on the first day of this road trip, persuading him to leave New York in the pitch dark 5 hours earlier than we intended, and he hadn't been amused by that because he'd been hoping to gain a little bit more sleep. If I thought getting up early would mean we'd get to Oregon sooner, I was certainly mistaken about that. I guess you could say I'd come to the Oregon coast ill-prepared, in every sense of the word. The last time I'd come here, we'd flown here and hired a rental car once we arrived at the coast, but driving all the way to this rugged part of the coastline, with its high cliffs and precarious steep climbs, had been tumultuous to say the very least, although I cannot deny the fact that the scenery that swaddled us on every side was nothing short of spectacular. But I wouldn't expect anything less from the Oregon coast. By all accounts, in normal circumstances, if Gully and I were coming to the Oregon coast on our own to enjoy a 3-week vacation together, I'd have been absolutely over the moon about this trip, and all the leisurely time we could spend together, enjoying long walks along the coastline and breathing in the fresh briny air. But on the contrary, this time I was rather like a flustered pigeon that had had an altercation with a family tabby. I was terribly afraid of what kind of reception I would receive when we finally arrived at my in-laws' home. As Sonia Finnegan, Gully's mother, well, she's the most judgmental person I've ever had the privilege to meet. And my last visit to their home, when we first arrived here, well, it didn't go terribly well for me. I knew the first time Sonia Finnegan laid eyes on me that she didn't like me one little bit, for I failed to meet her exacting standards, which, believe me, are exceedingly high and unattainable, for not many women would likely be good enough for her son. I had courageously tried to put on a brave face for the duration of this trip, for the sake of Gully, but it certainly wasn't easy to wear an optimistic outlook on my person, like an extra layer of clothing. I stoically managed a half-hearted smile, but the fake happiness I planted on my face certainly did not meet the dread that was burgeoning up inside me, like a wild vine, suffocating everything in its wake. I tried, of course, to persuade myself that this time things would be different. Things last time were decidedly tense, as I'd only just met my in-laws for the very first time. My mother-in-law, Sonia, was still desirous that my husband, Gully, was still married to his first wife, Lydia, and that woman was still very much in the picture. So my rude intrusion into their lives, like an unwanted seagull dropping, splattering itself across the car windscreen window, and falling out of the sky like a fortuitous, nasty surprise, well, Sonia hadn't welcomed that at all. To all intents and purposes, I knew at the time Sonia and I were slowly getting acclimatized to each other, like when you introduce a new pet to your family home. And at first the other animals don't welcome the new addition very favourably, but after a while, when things begin to settle down, the animals get on famously. Could I dare to hope that would be the same for me and the pugnaciously belligerent Sonia Finnegan? I kept assuring myself that now that Sonia and I knew each other a little better, and she had got used to the idea of Gully having a brand new wife, surely some of the tight uneasiness would invariably shift, rather like a pair of elasticated pants that finally has some give after being worn and stretched countless times over. I wanted to believe this to be the truth, but deep down in my gut, a hollow, vacuous feeling was beginning to taunt me, accompanied by a still small voice that was warning me to be on high alert, and that my relationship with Sonia Finnegan would prove to be a lot more complicated than I'd first believed. Instinctively, I guess I always knew that things would not be different, for when does a leopard ever change its spots? I doubt my mother-in-law would have suddenly morphed into Cinderella's fairy godmother. She was more like the Wicked Witch of the West, if you were to liken her to a character in a children's fairy tale. It had been 6 months since I last saw Sonia Finnegan, and I was not looking remotely forward to seeing her again. Even if I never saw her again, it would probably have been too soon. I never, of course, shared those spiteful thoughts with my husband, who knew all too well how cantankerous and overbearing his mother could be at times. He didn't need me to point this out to him. He had been upset on our previous visit to his parents' home that there had been no love lost between me and his mother, which I imagine must have been very upsetting for him, as no man wants to come between his mother and his wife, the two women he loves, who are at each other's throats like a couple of fighting dogs. It would seem the closer we got to my in-laws' gloriously beautiful home on the Oregon coast, the less comfortable I became. As a feeling of impending dread consumed me, I nervously twitched as I shifted my position awkwardly in the passenger side seat, crossing one leg over another, and then changing it again and again, which has got to be exceedingly annoying for any driver. Gully was trying his level best to focus on navigating some of those precarious roads, with steep drops and high cliff faces that overlooked a beautiful blue coastline and a cloudless sky, where seagulls were cawing loudly, with wings outstretched as they circled the ocean. Gully glanced at me, raising a brow. "You keep shifting in your seat. An awful lot, as if you've got ants in your pants." "Oh, no," he sighed. "You're bursting to go to the toilet, aren't you? We only stopped a short while ago at a gas station. You went then. Surely you don't need to go again. You must have the bladder of an elephant, with a sprinkler system that is large enough to put out all the wildfires in California." If Gully thought he was being funny, I wasn't amused, nor was I laughing. The road trip had sucked my sense of humour dry, and sapped all the energy out of me. It didn't help that I felt the sweat trickling down my back, and my crumpled pink shirt sticking to my back like the cling film over a sweaty ham sandwich. When the hell would this trip ever be over? I wondered. It seemed to be going on forever, as if there was no end in sight. I scowled at Gully. I had become cranky. My good mood had dissipated like the steam from a kettle. I felt like one of those small yapping dogs that would have very much liked to have given Gully a good old nip at this point, and it would have given me a great deal of satisfaction to do just that. Possibly most of my grievances were really due to the thought of having to face my mother-in-law again, and just thinking of Sonia giving me one of her condescending looks. Well, that was making my blood run cold. I never imagined for a single moment that when I married Gully, I'd have a battle on my hands and a treacherous mountain to climb, and that mountain was Sonia Finnegan herself. At this point in our long drawn-out journey, Leonard Cohen was annoyingly booming in my ears, and his deep raspy voice, along with the heat of the summer's day, had left me feeling deflated, rather like a burst balloon. I snapped at Gully and said, "Ha, ha, ha! That's so funny! Look at me, I'm really laughing! No, I don't need to go to the toilet if you must know. And for your information, I do not have the bladder of an elephant, and I resent you suggesting that I do, and that I could put out the wildfires in California with my pee. But if I could put out all the wildfires, I guess my services would be in high demand," I said sarcastically. "Good God, love! Look at you! You're so sullen. You look so miserable. You look rather like a cat that's been cooped up in a cage for days on end, without any food and water, that wants to scratch my eyes out. Can't a man make a joke? You've been moving a hell of a lot, love. You keep crossing your legs over and over again and shifting in your seat. What was I supposed to think? I came to the conclusion that you were desperate for the toilet." "Well, you would cross your legs 100 times over if you had to sit in a stuffy car like this, listening to Leonard Cohen in the searing heat. I feel stiff and exhausted from this journey. I'm not used to sitting in a passenger side seat for hours at a time. You know me. I'm impatient at the best of times." "Don't I know it?" said Gully, flashing me a cheeky, mischievous grin. "You, Sandra, are the most impatient person I've ever met. But despite what you might think, there is an endearing charm in your urgency to rush all the time." He reached out and grabbed my hand, giving it a tight squeeze. "When I asked you to marry me, the next thing I knew after you said yes, 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 you rushed me off to Vegas, didn't you? Booked that cute little ceremony for us, where the man who married us tried to impersonate Elvis Presley. Not very well, I might add. You bought that lovely bluish-white dress that made you look like you'd walked out of a fairy tale and were floating on air. You rushed out onto the street to grab a man to witness our wedding ceremony. And of all the men you picked, you chose a man who could barely stand up straight. I'm certain he was high on a cocktail of drugs. He was grinning manically during our whole ceremony, while we shared our vows together. Then the cheeky sod asked me if he could ride back with you in the fancy limousine to the hotel, as he'd like to spend some quality time with you. I had to remind him that I was the one that had married you and not him, and I had no intention of sharing my bride with him. The poor man looked so disappointed. I think he thought because he'd witnessed our wedding that he had some claim to you. When I gave him a couple of notes, well, he was a very happy man indeed, whistling away merrily to himself, as he imagined his next high, I imagine. It's funny, Sandra, but when I'm around you, I feel alive. Exciting things happen, and it's never been like that for me in the past. I'm a regular guy who lives a pretty humdrum, predictable life. But when you came along like a beautiful butterfly, it was like you stirred up the murky pond and turned the water crystal clear, and I love that about you. But I rushed you into that ceremony in Vegas, Gully. I didn't want you to change your mind about marrying me, I teased. I was worried when you found out what I was really like. You might just run a mile. Gully chuckled. You think I'd changed my mind about you, Sandra? Never, never, not in a million months of Sundays. I struck gold when I met you. Yes, you've got some quirky habits, but haven't we all? And I've navigated my way around them. But I wouldn't change you for the world. You're a breath of fresh air in my life. There are lots of things I would change about you, Gully, I assured him. Quite a few, actually, now I come to think about it. Don't tell me. I'm well versed in what those things are. You wish I wasn't so frugal and would splash out on a few extravagances. And you wish that I would put air conditioning on in this car of mine, so that you wouldn't have to sweat all the way to the coast like a pig. Got it in a nutshell, I said, not mentioning that another thing I would change about my husband was his parents, most especially his mother Sonia. But instead of taking a jab at his mother, I just nonchalantly revealed how I was feeling about this trip. I wanted Gully to know that in the future this was not the way that I wanted us to travel to his parents' beachfront property. I never wanted to endure a long, insufferable road trip like this again. I wish we'd flown to the coast, Gully, like we sensibly did last time. I think driving here was a big mistake, a tedious thing for us to do. Let's not kid. It doesn't help that it's so very hot in this car of yours. No thanks to you, I said, feeling an irresistible sudden urge to express my extreme indignance about the lack of air conditioning in my husband's SUV. But I had drummed my feelings about this into him long and hard, and it had made absolutely no difference at all. By all accounts, I'd have to be dying and gasping for breath before Gully would be generous and considerate enough to put on the air conditioning for me to enjoy. I had to put up with quite a lot with Gully, but I knew I was a very lucky woman to have married such a loving man, so some sacrifices are well worth making when it comes to the person you love. Gully sighed. I realized even he had become fatigued, worn out and defeated from the long road trip, and Gully is a long-suffering person who is much more patient than I ever am. He popped a cherry menthol lozenge into his mouth and glanced down briefly at his watch. We should be at my parents' place in an hour or so. Then you can stretch your legs as much as you like. We might actually be able to enjoy a long walk on the beach. We could take a stroll together. It's a beautiful day, is it not? And the coast is so lovely and serene. Look, there's not a single cloud in sight. Of course, that could change. The weather can be very temperamental here. I get why my parents retired here, you know. Who doesn't want to wake up every morning to enjoy pristine sea views like this every day, and enjoy leisurely walks on the beach? When my parents first moved here from New York, I was exceedingly doubtful about such a dramatic change of scene for them. I guess I considered my mother to be your quintessential city slicker. I mean, she's lived in New York all her life. She was born and raised here. She's used to the vibrant buzz of the city. I couldn't imagine her adjusting to another lifestyle. So when she left New York to come to the Oregon coast, I thought it was a crazy thing to do. I mean, she loved everything about New York. She had so many friends there. She'd go off to the theatre, to a music festival, or to cheese and wine tasting. She'd return home to her brownstone apartment with a plethora of shopping bags from exclusive designer boutiques, because that's what my mother loved to do. Well, I can believe that about your mother. She's definitely high maintenance. You're not wrong about that. You've never seen anyone shop like my mother. She loves shopping and attending all kinds of social events. So when she chose to settle down to a more quiet, subdued life on the Oregon coast, in a more sequestered area with superb views, well, in truth, I thought my mother would be bored out of her skull, would find life out here far too dull. But I was wrong about that. My parents have been here now for about 5 years. They've never been more happy. To be fair, my mother takes regular trips to New York when she gets the perennial itch to go shopping again and meet up with some of her old friends. But the good news is she's made plenty of friends out here. 2 of her girlfriends are New Yorkers, ex-New Yorkers. They've settled at the coast permanently, and that's worked out extremely well for my mother. She gets on with them like a house on fire because they have so much in common. Furthermore, moving out here, she got to design her own dream home, overlooking the beach. So maybe I shouldn't be surprised that she's so happy here. Correction, Gully, I reminded my husband. She may be happy living here at the coast, and I'm sure she is, but she'd be a whole lot happier if you were still married to Lydia. I know your mother absolutely hates me. I can tell by the way she looks at me. She really disapproves of me. Don't go there, babe. Please don't go there. Lydia was a whole nother chapter in my life that is well and truly over. Thank God for that. Yes, I admit my mother loved Lydia, and in her eyes Lydia could do no wrong. She sees me as the cad for ending my marriage with that woman prematurely. Lydia was the one that did the dirty on me. It was certainly not the other way round. But try telling that to my mother. It's like telling a flat earther that the earth is round. They refuse to listen to sound reasoning. They prefer to believe what suits their personal narrative, rather like so many politicians that are so biased and so partisan, they'll twist things to suit their own agenda. When I married Lydia, she and my mother became the very best of friends. They'd go shopping together and out for lunch. Lydia seamlessly mixed with my mother's circle of friends. So I guess when I ended things with Lydia, my mother was absolutely devastated. She had grown very attached to my ex-wife and regarded her as the daughter she never had. But your mother hates me, simply because I'm not Lydia. Go on, admit it, Gully. You know it's true. She thinks you made a catastrophic mistake in marrying me. Well, my mother is just going to have to learn to suck eggs, isn't she? If she chooses to engage in such stinking thinking. Well, I'm not going to tolerate it. You're the love of my life, aren't you, Sandra? And if my mother can't get on board with that, it's her problem, not ours. Give her time, babe. My mother's extremely set in her ways, very rigidly stiff about stuff. She was extremely fond of Lydia, and thought we'd be together forever. She's never been good with change, you know. But I think maybe after 3 weeks spent here with her at the beach, well, you and my mother, you never know, you might get on better. And maybe in time she'll be fussing over you like a mother hen, and end up loving you as much as she loved Lydia. Stranger things have happened. I snorted, making a scathing face. Like it really would happen. And my husband laughed. You're incorrigible, he teased. You look so cynical. Yes, my mother. Well, let's just say it. She's never been an easy woman. But everybody knows that. How my father has put up with her all these years, God only knows. I could never be married to someone like her. She's what's the word? Overbearing, insufferable, pompous, opinionated, self-entitled, I offered. I could go on if you like, I teased. That won't be necessary. I know what you think of my mother, babe. Word of advice. Just don't let her rub you up the wrong way. If she knows she's upset you, well, she might go in for the kill, if you know what I mean. Just hold your own, and don't let anything she says rile you up. Me and my father learnt that a long time ago. It's easier said than done, but I'm going to try my best to make your mother like me. That's not necessary, babe. said Gully, reaching out to squeeze my hand reassuringly. "Be yourself, and in time you'll have that contrary mother of mine eating out of your hands, I'm most sure." So there we are. That is the end of part 1 of our story. Part 2 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.